On a cold autumn afternoon, with leaves dancing across the asphalt and the rush of cars drowning out human sounds, a muffled cry slipped into the air. It came from a small boy, kneeling in the middle of the street beside a broken blue bicycle. Tears streamed down 7-year-old Danny's dirt-smudged cheeks as he struggled, with trembling hands, to fix a loose chain he barely understood. People walked past him, hurried and detached, stepping around him like he wasn't even there. Until someone stopped. She appeared like a shadow out of place, wearing a dress far too thin for the weather, her hair wild and eyes tired but sharp. Callista, homeless for nearly 2 years, knelt beside the boy without hesitation. She had been collecting cans, minding her own quiet survival, but the look in that boy's eyes pulled her back into a humanity she thought the streets had long since taken from her. "Did you hurt yourself?" she asked, her voice rough but gentle. Danny just shook his head and sniffled. Callista opened an old toolbox she carried like a lifeline, and with surprising precision, began fixing the bicycle. A few feet away, a well-dressed man in a dark overcoat stood frozen, watching in disbelief. Boaz Winchester, an investment executive and widower since the day his son was born, had been about to cross the street to scold the boy for running off. But now, he couldn't move. Something about the way the woman touched the bike, so calm, so careful, and the silence shared between her and his son said more than words ever could. Boaz couldn't look away. For the first time in years, his world of deals and deadlines came to a stop. As Callista tightened the last bolt, she quietly asked, "Where's your mom?" Danny hesitated, then whispered, "She died. It's just my dad now, but he's always on the phone." Her words hit Callista like a punch to the gut. There was no time to grieve someone else's pain when you barely had shoes, but something in that answer cracked her open. She placed a hand gently on his head and said, "Then hold on to him. With everything you've got." Boaz's sleek black car still waited at the red light. But now he wasn't just watching. His eyes were wet, his chest tight, and something inside demanded he do something, but he didn't know what. It wasn't traffic that kept him frozen. It was fear. Fear of looking into his son's face and realizing just how far he'd drifted. And in that moment, as Callista stood up and began to walk away without expecting thanks, Danny did something that would change everything. He ran after her. Callista heard the sound of small footsteps rushing behind her, the quick shuffle of sneakers over concrete. She turned, thinking maybe the boy had dropped something, or worse, that she'd done something wrong. But when she looked over her shoulder, Danny was running straight toward her, arms open, face red from crying and wind. He wrapped his little arms around her waist and held on like he was afraid she might vanish. Callista froze. It had been years since anyone had touched her without fear or pity. She didn't know what to do with tenderness anymore. She crouched down slowly, her knees aching from nights sleeping on pavement. "Hey," she said softly, "you okay?" Danny nodded but didn't let go. His voice was muffled against her coat. "You're the nicest person I've met in a long time." Callista felt something in her throat tighten. The street noise faded for a moment, and all she could hear was her own heartbeat, loud, steady, and painfully real. She hadn't come out here looking for connection. She came out to survive the day. But now this boy was holding on like she mattered. From across the street, Boaz watched his son cling to a woman who smelled of rust and city grime, but whose touch had calmed him more in 5 minutes than Boaz had managed in 5 months. He didn't understand it, why Danny had run to her, why he looked so at peace. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, adjusting the lapels of his coat like armor. This was unfamiliar territory, and Boaz wasn't used to walking into the unknown. As he approached, Callista noticed him immediately. Her body tensed, eyes darting toward the alley as if calculating how fast she could disappear. People didn't usually walk toward her unless they wanted something, or wanted her gone. "He yours?" she asked, standing up slowly, placing herself instinctively between Boaz and the boy. Boaz nodded, unsure if he should thank her or apologize. Yes. His name's Danny. I'm his father. Boaz. He extended a hand, but Callista didn't take it. She simply gave a small nod. I wasn't trying to scare him or anything, she said, voice firm but not defensive. He was crying. I just fixed his bike. Boaz looked at her and then at the bike, perfectly aligned and cleaner than before. He was about to say something, maybe thank her, maybe offer money, but Danny interrupted, gripping Callista's hand. Can she come home with us? He asked, eyes wide and hopeful. Boaz blinked. For a moment, all the noise of the city stopped again. Boaz hesitated. The question hit him harder than he expected. He looked down at Danny, whose eyes were full of something rare, trust. It wasn't that Boaz didn't want to say yes. It was that he didn't know how. He wasn't the kind of man who brought strangers into his home, much less someone like her, someone the world would call broken. Danny, he began carefully, she helped you and that was very kind. But we don't even know her name. Danny looked at Callista, waiting. She met Boaz's eyes, guarded but steady. It's Callista, she said. Just Callista. She didn't flinch. She had no reason to pretend. Callista knew how people looked at her. Pity at best, fear at worst. But this boy had seen through all that in seconds. It was unsettling, beautiful, dangerous. She hadn't expected kindness to come from a child, or guilt to come from his father. Boaz shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound hollow. Thank you, Callista, for what you did today. She shrugged. He was crying. That's all. Boaz glanced at the toolbox in her hand. You fix bikes often? He asked, trying to buy time, trying to understand who she was, why she felt so familiar. Used to, she said. Before. The word hung in the air like fog. She didn't explain, and he didn't ask. Some stories announce themselves by the way they go silent. Danny still hadn't let go of her hand. We could help her, Dad, he said quietly. Like she helped me. The innocence in his voice made Callista look away. Boaz was a man of logic, of structure and plans. But nothing about this moment fit into any of those. A homeless woman holding his son's hand, the boy pleading for her to come home. It felt like his carefully built world was slipping sideways. And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't walk away. Instead, he surprised himself. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? He asked. Callista blinked at him, her expression unreadable. There's a shelter on 32nd. If they have space. He nodded. Come with us. I'll drive you there. Her first instinct was to refuse. Pride, survival instinct, whatever it was, it rose up like a wall. But Danny's fingers tightened slightly around hers, and for the first time in a long while, she felt warm skin that didn't recoil from hers. Okay, she said quietly. Just a ride. Boaz nodded. Just a ride. But nothing about this ride would be simple. The silence inside Boaz's car felt heavier than the cold outside. Callista sat in the back seat next to Danny, her hands resting on her knees, her gaze fixed on the dark blur of the city passing by the window. She didn't belong in a leather interior that smelled like cedar and expensive cologne. Her body stiffened every time the tires hit a bump, like she was bracing for something, though she wasn't sure what. Danny leaned against her shoulder, eyes slowly closing, safe in a way Callista hadn't felt in years. Boaz glanced at them through the rear-view mirror. The woman was a complete stranger, yet his son was resting against her like they had known each other forever. He tried to focus on the road, but his thoughts were louder than the engine. This wasn't part of any plan. He was a man who lived by rules, who scheduled life to avoid the unpredictable. And yet here he was, driving a homeless woman to a shelter, with his son asleep on her arm. It made no sense. But it also felt necessary. As they neared 32nd Street, Callista sat up straighter. "You can drop me off at the corner," she said, her voice flat. Boaz didn't respond at first. He slowed the car, his eyes searching the dim block ahead. The building looked run down, lights flickering in the hallway window. A group of men huddled outside, smoking, one of them shouting something to no one in particular. "Are you sure this is the best place?" he asked. Callista nodded once. "It's not about best. It's about open beds." Boaz pulled over and put the car in park. Danny stirred but didn't wake. Callista gently moved his head from her shoulder to the seat, her touch light, careful. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the door handle. Boaz didn't know what to say. He wanted to say something that mattered, but nothing came out right. So instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need anything, I mean it." Callista took it, hesitated, then tucked it into her boot without a word. As she stepped out into the cold night, the wind caught her coat and lifted it like wings. Boaz watched her walk toward the building, shoulders squared, head high despite everything. For a moment, he wanted to call out to her. Ask her name again. Ask her who she used to be. But he stayed silent. And in the back seat, Danny mumbled in his sleep, "Don't let her go." Callista didn't sleep that night. The cot was hard, the air smelled of mildew and resignation, and the sounds of coughing, muttering, and restless bodies filled the room. But that wasn't what kept her awake. It was the boy. Danny's voice echoing in her head, "Don't let her go." As if he knew. As if he saw something in her that no one else had bothered to look for. She turned to the wall, blinking back tears. She hated crying. It made her feel like the girl she used to be. The girl with a name that meant something. Across town, Boaz sat in his study, staring at the business card he'd given her. He kept checking his phone, as if she might call, though she hadn't even looked at the number. He didn't understand this restlessness, this need to do more. It wasn't like him. He wasn't reckless. But ever since his wife died giving birth to Danny, he'd built walls so thick, nothing could shake them, until now. A stranger with dirt under her nails and kindness in her eyes had cracked something open. And Boaz didn't know how to close it again. The next morning, Callista stood in line for burnt coffee and a bruised banana when someone behind her said her name. Callista Ray? Her spine went stiff. Nobody used her full name anymore. She turned slowly and saw a face from a life she'd buried. Gina, a woman she used to work with at the repair shop. Gina's eyes widened. "Jesus. It is you." Callista's face flushed with heat. "Don't," she whispered. Gina ignored it. "I thought you were dead." Callista's throat tightened. "I wanted to be," she said quietly, and walked away without taking the coffee. Later that day, Boaz picked Danny up from school. He was quieter than usual, staring out the window. "She's not okay, is she?" he asked softly. Boaz shook his head. "I don't know, son." Danny nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. "You should find her," he said. "People like her don't last long out there." It wasn't a child's plea, it was a truth. One Boaz couldn't unhear. That night, Boaz drove past the shelter. The same group of men stood outside, and she wasn't among them. He didn't stop. He didn't ask. But he looked. 4 blocks. 4 hours. Something had shifted. Not just in him, but in how he saw the world. The lines between them and us were blurring. And for the first time in years, Boaz felt the ache of not knowing where someone slept. He hadn't seen her since that night. But she had already moved into his son's heart, and maybe, without realizing it, into his. Callista walked with her hands in her pockets, head down, coat zipped up to her chin. The temperature had dropped, and the wind was merciless as she made her way toward a place she swore never to return to, the old garage on 5th Street. It had been almost 3 years since she walked out of there, carrying nothing but a backpack and a heart full of rage. But after seeing Gina again, she needed to know if anything from her past still existed. Maybe a part of herself, buried under oil stains and regret. The building hadn't changed. The rust on the gates was thicker, and the old sign, Mason's Auto and Repair, hung crooked. But the smell, the air, even the sound of a rat scurrying behind the dumpster. It was all familiar. Callista stood across the street for a long moment, frozen. Her father used to work there. So did she, before everything went to hell. Before addiction, eviction, and a boyfriend who left bruises instead of answers. Before she lost the version of herself that still believed in mornings. Meanwhile, Boaz stood in front of a different kind of door, a sleek glass panel that led into the heart of his office building. He was supposed to be preparing for a meeting, but instead he was scrolling through local shelter reports, trying to find her name. She hadn't checked back in since the night he dropped her off. No one had seen her, and it bothered him more than he could explain. Not because he owed her anything, but because Danny kept asking. And because a part of him wanted to know she was safe. At lunch, Boaz drove to 5th Street. He didn't have a reason. He just remembered Danny mentioning something about bicycles, and the word repair kept echoing in his head. When he parked a block away and started walking, he had no idea what he was hoping to find. But as he turned the corner, he saw her. Callista! Sitting on a milk crate outside the garage, head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed like she was trying to breathe in something long lost. She didn't see him right away. But he saw her. Not as a woman on the street. Not even as the stranger who'd helped his son. He saw her as someone who once had roots here. A person with history, scars, and stories locked behind tired eyes. And suddenly, he wasn't afraid to speak. "Callista," he said, voice steady. "You ever think about working here again?" Callista opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the bright sky. At primero, achu que estives imaginando a vos. Mas la esteve, Boaz, de pm frente ao antigo porteo, com as maus nos bolsos y olhersirios, mas, humano. Ella ficu de pé devagar, desconfiada. "Why are you here?" Perguntu sem rodeos. Ele do de ombros. "I didn't plan it. I just drove." O silencio entre os dois era carregado, mas neo desconfortável. Era o tipo de silencio que nas quando duas pessoas carregam mais do que conseguem dizer em voz alta. Ela encarou o letrero velho da oficina. "This place is dead," murmurou. "Not much left to fix." Boaz caminhou a porta trancada e alhu atraves do vidro sujo. "Maybe. But I saw the way you handled my son's bike. You knew exactly what you were doing." Callista cruzou os bracos, tentando esconder o aperto no peito. Era fácil desmontar uma corrente de bicicleta. Difícil era remontar a si mesma. "You offering me a job?" Ela perguntou, meio rindo. Ele respondeu sem hesitar, "Yes." Ela riu, mas neo de verdade. "You don't know me, Boaz. You don't know what I've done. Where I've been." Ele assentiu. "No. But I saw who you were with my son. And I trust that. As palavras bateram forte. Neo porque ela acreditava nelas, mas porque queria acreditar. Depois de tantos anos sendo ignorada ou temida, alguém estava dizendo que via algo nela que valia ser rescatado. Isso era novo. Isso era perigoso. "There's no one to vouch for me," ela diz, mas para si mesma do que para ele. "No references. No address. No clean record." Boaz apenas respondeu, "Everyone starts somewhere." Let this be your somewhere. Callista neo sub ok dizer. Tudo dentro della gritava para fugir, era mais seguro continuar sendo ninguém. Mas Danny? O jeito que ele seguro sua mau, após nos alhas dele. Talvez ela devesse isso a ele. Talvez devesse isso a si mesma. Ela respirou fundo, encarando o prédio como se estivesse vendo sua antiga vida de longe. Depois, olhou para Boaz, e pela primeira vez, disse a armadura quer pouco. 1 week, disse. No promises. Boaz estendeu a mão. Deal. E naquele aperto de mão entre mundos opostos, algo mudou. Nada estava resolvido ainda. Mas pela primeira vez, o passado neo era tudo o que restava para ela. E pela primeira vez, Boaz sentiu que estava fazendo algo que neo podia comprar, e que, talvez, fosse mais valioso do que tudo que já teve. On her first morning back at the garage, Callista arrived before sunrise. The air was sharp and cold, but she liked it that way, clean, honest, nothing hidden. She unlocked the side door with the spare key Boaz had somehow tracked down and stepped into a space that smelled of oil, rust, and something deeper, memory. The same workbench her father once used still stood in the corner, though time had warped its surface. She ran her fingers over it, and for a second she was a teenager again, full of grease, full of purpose. Boaz showed up just after 8, coffee in one hand, a toolbox in the other. He didn't say much. Neither did she. They worked in silence for an hour, replacing a fuel pump on an old Ford, like it was just another Tuesday. But the weight in the air said otherwise. Callista kept waiting for the moment he'd flinch, the moment he'd treat her like a project instead of a person. But it didn't come. Not yet. Instead, he simply asked, "How long were you out there?" She paused. "Too long to count," she said, then turned back to the engine. Later that day, a man in a gray suit came by, a colleague of Boaz's from the finance world. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Callista under the hood, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. "That her?" he muttered. "The street woman?" Boaz stiffened. "Her name is Callista." The man chuckled, dismissive. "Right. Well, just be careful. People like that, they don't change. They survive. Big difference." Callista heard it all. Didn't flinch. Just kept working. But inside, her hands were trembling. That night, Boaz found her still in the garage, cleaning tools long after closing. "You don't have to stay late," he said. She shrugged. "I don't have anywhere else to be." He leaned against the doorway. "I'm sorry about earlier." For what he said. Callista finally looked up. "You don't have to apologize for your world, Boaz. I've been hated before. Judged. Ignored. But now, I'm noticed. That's scarier than anything." Boaz nodded, not sure what to say. He understood now. This wasn't just about a job. It was about letting herself be seen. She wiped her hands on a rag and turned to leave. "I'm not looking for pity," she added. "Just space to stand." Boaz watched her walk out into the night, her shoulders straighter than when she arrived. And for the first time, he realized that fixing engines might be easier than fixing people, but both required patience and the courage to believe they could be fixed. 2 weeks passed. Callista showed up every morning, grease under her nails, sleeves rolled, quiet but steady. The garage began to feel like hers again, not in ownership, but in familiarity. She knew where every tool belonged. She even started humming while she worked, though she didn't realize it. Boaz noticed, but said nothing. He just watched. And Danny, he visited every afternoon, hopping out of the car with a sandwich for her, acting like this was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe somehow it had become that. But the past doesn't knock. It kicks the door open. One rainy afternoon, a plain white envelope showed up at the garage, addressed to her in shaky handwriting. No return address. Just her name, Callista Ray. She stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. The words inside were simple. I'm out. I still remember what you did. You owe me. No signature. But she knew who it was. Travis. The man who had nearly destroyed her. The man who pulled her into the spiral she'd barely escaped from. The next morning, she didn't show up. Boaz called. No answer. He drove by the shelter. No sign of her. 4 hours, he circled the blocks she used to sleep on. Nothing. Danny sat in the back seat, clutching the sandwich they'd packed for her. She's not gone, he whispered, like it was a spell he was trying to cast. She promised. Boaz wanted to believe that. But a dark part of him, the part conditioned by years of guarded living, whispered that maybe they had been right. Maybe she was just surviving. Maybe she'd never really left the streets. But just after sunset, she walked into the garage, soaking wet, shaking. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Not in front of him. She tossed the crumpled letter onto the counter. I need to go away, she said. For 1 day. Maybe 2. Boaz stepped forward. Is it someone dangerous? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I can help, he said. I have resources. Callista shook her head. No. If I let you help, he wins. He'll always have a hold over me. She turned to leave, but Boaz called her name. Don't disappear again, he said. She paused. I won't, she replied. I'm not that version of me anymore. And with that, she vanished into the night, not as a runaway, but as a woman walking straight into a storm she refused to let control her life ever again. Callista returned 2 days later, just as she had promised. Her face was bruised, one eye slightly swollen, and her knuckles scraped raw, but her eyes? Clear. Focused. Boaz was tightening a bolt on an engine when she walked through the garage doors. He didn't rush to her, didn't bombard her with questions. He just looked up, met her eyes, and nodded once. She nodded back. No explanations. No pity. Just a quiet agreement. She'd made it through, and she came back. Later that night, after Danny was asleep, Boaz sat with her outside the garage, 2 mugs of coffee between them. Was it him? He asked finally. Callista stared out at the street. Yeah. He thought I still belonged to that life. That he could pull me back in with fear. Boaz clenched his jaw, but stayed quiet. She continued, voice steady. I told him he doesn't get to own my story anymore. I don't owe him pain. I don't owe him silence. For the first time, she sounded free. Boaz reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same business card he had given her weeks ago, now bent, smudged, and softened by time. This still stands, he said. Not just for work. For anything. Callista took the card and smiled. You know, she said, for a man who used to live by spreadsheets and rules, you've become surprisingly human. He chuckled. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. The next day, Boaz surprised her. He had repainted the garage sign. Where it once said Mason's Auto and Repair, it now read Callista's Garage. She froze, staring up at it in disbelief. You changed the name? Boaz shrugged. You earned it. It was never just a job. You rebuilt more than engines here. Callista's lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she picked up a wrench and walked inside. Let's get to work. Weeks later, people started coming in just because they'd heard some woman on 5th Street fix things like nobody else. The word spread. Business grew. And Danny? He never stopped showing up. He brought her coffee, asked endless questions about engines, and called her Miss Callista, with a smile that felt like family. And Boaz? He stopped seeing her as a risk. She wasn't a case. She wasn't a cause. She was Callista, a woman who faced the fire and walked back stronger. Not the version the world tried to leave behind. The version she chose to become.